Welcome back to the Real Recovery Show. Today we have a really great episode for you on a therapeutic modality called EMDR. And if you don't know what that stands for, stay tuned because it could be something that could really change your life. Today's episode is going to take us deep into what EMDR is, how to apply it, what the experience looks like, and what you could look forward to having relief from if you have addiction or PTSD or chronic pain or anything like that. Actually, it started in 1987 as a modality specifically designed for PTSD. But over the years, it's been expanded out and used for a myriad of other things. But today, we are joined with Tay Singer.
Hi, guys.
Who's going to share a little bit about her experience, how she got exposed to this, and what she ended up studying, and she did a capstone on, and ended up doing it for herself with a therapist.
Yeah, so I got introduced to it when I was working at a rehab, and a friend of mine was getting certified in EMDR, and so she needed to get some hours and get some training in it, and so she and I, were just messing around with it, and I was just, her practice person, and as we were doing it, some trauma that I hadn't really processed. I had been in therapy for many years. And this was 2017 that this all happened. And I had been in therapy since 2005, and I'd been sober since 2007. So I had already 10 years clean and sober. And so I'd already worked on a lot of things in my life, but there's this one trauma came up through EMDR that hadn't come up before. And it's because I had been doing more cognitive therapies where it was more about the thought process and trying to not want to kill myself was really the goal for most of my therapy. But now I was able to work on some different things that I hadn't really been able to dig deep into. Mm-hmm. And so doing EMDR with her opened up this whole other world. And so I actually found a therapist that had been doing EMDR for a long time and started doing it with him. And the reason I did that is you're really not supposed to do therapy with your friend. Right. And so, and my problem has been for many years that most of my friends are therapists. And so it was just interesting to find somebody that I didn't know that wasn't in the recovery community and that was able to dig deep with me in this EMDR thing and help me access some traumas that I didn't know that I needed to work through still. And it was a really good another starting point for that next layer of that onion that I like to talk about.
So you've been in college for a while. And in it, when you had to write your capstone, why did you pick this is one of the brain-based therapies that you talked about? So
in my capstone, the assignment was to come up with a modality that was all-encompassing and perfect for for different traumas. And I had been doing cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. Mm-hmm. That was the first therapy that I had done right after my rape. And then I had been doing EMDR, 10 years later, or 11 years later. And then I did brain spotting. And so for me, that was what was the thing that gave me the most freedom and so I wrote my capstone on the way that this all came about, for me, this is what worked. And so right. I was able to not just apply the therapeutic principles and that sort of thing, but also to apply my own experience. And growing up in recovery, my experience has right. been the biggest helper for other people.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And so now we're going to talk to another person that we have here in the studio that his focus has been on the other side of the chair of being an EMDR certified therapist who actually is also a supervisor and has his own practice called Chief Counseling. And his name is Chief, not a coincidence. And so now he's going to share about how long he's been sober and how how he got into EMDR and a little bit about why he chose that to be a very big part of his therapeutic process.
Yeah, absolutely. If I could start by saying thank you for sharing that. That was beautiful. And what a story. Oh my gosh. So yes, my name is Chief. My practice is Chief Counseling. I have been in private practice since December 31st, 2019. And so I am sober, almost 7 years sober, and my sobriety date is 10/4/2015.
Nice.
So coming up on 7 years. I was introduced to EMDR it was a couple years ago. I can't remember. I think it was 2017 or 2018. The years blend together. And I remember being introduced to this by a friend she's a fellow therapist. She's an absolutely outstanding therapist, and she took me under her wing and she introduced me to EMDR. And she told me a few things about it. I was like, okay. She said, I'm totally going to do this. Do you want to do it? Yep, just because you're doing it. So I'm like, if you're doing it, it must be the thing to do. And so we went to she did her training, and then a couple months later I did my training. And from the very first training, the training that I had was part 1, part 2. Part 1, I was sold. I was like, what is this? And so this is it absolutely amazing form of therapy. Now, I wish that I could say that my first personal experience in seeking out an EMDR therapist was a great one. It wasn't. The EMDR therapist that I had, she's a wonderful woman. She's a wonderful therapist. And she was kind enough to, allow me to work with her in therapy. And it just, looking back, I feel as though maybe the explanation for what this wasn't something that I could really comprehend and conceive of. So then when we got further into what we were actually doing, I just wasn't able to either connect with it or something. And so I left this modality and went to a different modality, which, funny enough, I actually integrate with EMDR from time to time, depending on the case.
It would be really nice to know that there is something that could be done to help the mind be able to deal with chronic pain better. Another thing is that it could be used for eating disorders. And I understand, now understanding more about what EMDR is, I can understand how it could be used for that. And I've had bulimia and body dysmorphic disorder. And so I can understand where that could be a really powerful tool for that. And then, of course, depression and anxiety disorders, panic disorders, which tend to all, if they're heavy amounts of depression especially, fall under the umbrella of PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. And so in your practice, what aspects do you focus primarily on PTSD, or have you ventured yet into any of the other things, or you just don't have the clients yet or whatever to
Yeah, absolutely. So I've worked a lot with PTSD. I've worked with veterans. I've worked with first responders. I have worked with complex PTSD, so people that are having traumatic events that are stemming over an extended period of time. I've worked with angers. I've worked with phobias, which is really interesting. I've worked with quite a few. There are so many different protocols within the umbrella of EMDR that it gives us the opportunity to keep on learning so many different things to just be able to help such an incredibly wide array of people. It's really amazing.
Do you find that somebody having a phobia, that it does have some connection to some form of trauma usually?
So in my experience, I will say that the phobias that I've worked with have had something to do with what is something that may have happened years and years ago, but not always. I had one client, I obviously don't want to give too many specific details, but with a fear of flying. And there's never, outside of the regular turbulence that planes have, never had a huge incident that happened. And that was the part that got me, which is like, okay, so nothing happened. There's turbulence, but that always happens in planes, in my experience anyway. And so how do I work with this? So working with that client, and then his report after the trip was incredible.
Nice.
Well, what's interesting about that is, like, I was just thinking when you were saying that about, I was a kid when the TWA crash happened.
Oh yeah, you can just observe something.
Like for me, that was scary. That was a scary thing to see on the news. Yeah. And I mean, since then 9/11's happened, and so like, even if we didn't necessarily experience it, it doesn't mean that it wasn't a traumatic experience.
Yeah. Plus, a lot of times when something happens that is a traumatic experience, a lot of times the mind just wants to wrap it up and then make a summation. So my takeaway from this experience is, don't ever this. Right. And we don't remember the why we got to that conclusion. Yeah. Like when I was a kid, my dad rejected me, I felt, and by telling me he wanted to be left alone. And I made a promise that no man was ever going to hurt me again, and I'm never going to let anybody in, and like all over that. Yeah. And he just wanted to be left alone. But but sometimes we don't remember. So to heal that trauma, I had to actually go back to that event and see it from a whole different perspective. Yeah. So that's really good. And for you've done EMDR primarily on or just on PTSD as well, correct?
So I actually yes, it's on PTSD, but I get very, very anxious, and I think that my anxiety was the worst during COVID. And I mean, from being around with masks and that sort of thing, and so there was some traumas that I had to like work isolation. Through, with the isolation and the being constricted and being confined and being lonely, and so like for me it was more of like situational things that I had to find the roots of, one of my experiences with EMDR, we were working on a pretty big trauma, and as we were going through it, I was having a lot of somatic responses. Like I was very anxious, I was very overwhelmed, I was very like my feelings were just extreme, and he had to like take a moment and like do the mindfulness piece and like really like let me like be covered in gold and like do this whole other part of it, because for me my emotions and feelings are so intense that I need something to reprocess.
Right. I think honestly, if you have PTSD, you're either going to have frozen feelings or you're going to have explosive or emotional. Like you're either an imploder or an exploder. Not to be so black and white with it, but I've met people who thought that they did not have PTSD and did not have anything to heal because they just did not feel anything. I'm like, that's not normal. We had like a previous episode on feelings where we had this feelings wheel, and it just broke them all up into all these different feelings. It's mind-numbing how many different ways you could feel, not just sad, angry, happy. That there's other things to feel in our lives. Absolutely. And so one of the things that appealed to me when I was learning about this, though, was what I read about that it's such it's an appealing thing, because oftentimes when you think about therapy, and it's not to say that talk therapy is bad, because oftentimes talk therapy is the thing that a person really needs to have or to experience. It's not making any particular way of therapy bad, right? But sometimes a person wants to really get in there and shift that perception and have some tools and a really talented therapist, and they want to do it in a more efficient manner. And so EMDR is obviously more efficient than talk therapy, which could be very drawn out and take a lot of time. EMDR could be a really good adjunct to any kind of therapy where you really want to get in and deal with some things and get faster results with minimal talking.
Yeah, that's a big thing, is that because of these types of traumas, sometimes talking it to death is worse. I mean, you can speak to that. So thank you for bringing that up. When we're talking about these therapies, it's not to say that can't be effective, but we're going from that part of our brain that's thinking and rationalizing and things of that nature. And oftentimes the trauma that we've experienced, it's not where
that's not where it is. That's trapped in our body.
Right.
And so when we're going from a bottom-up perspective and working with our body first in a therapy like EMDR, that's why we can come to a resolution of our symptoms more rapidly than if we start from the top down, because we're going from what our body is experiencing and the different parts of our body that are experiencing those symptoms. And
Sure.
that is why it can be a faster resolution.
Sure, but wouldn't you also say, and you don't have to agree with me, but wouldn't you also say that oftentimes people experience that they need to crawl before they walk, like they need to be able to start even having the conversation? Because if you take somebody who may have PTSD and they have, maybe they're just thawing out after they have been using drugs or alcohol for a while to avoid feeling the feelings and even admitting to themselves the stuff that's going on, when they get to a place where they start even talking in recovery and start, understanding where they were running on ideas for themselves, carrying resentments, where they might have blocks, where they need more spiritual depth and intuition, and where they could start learning in recovery to be more empowered rather than so powerless. Wouldn't you say that somebody can't just go from, okay, you've stopped the drug, now start the EMDR? Wouldn't you say that a person needs to kind of be in a position, I mean, not to say that you speak for everybody anyway, but just wouldn't you say that somebody needs to kind of get to a place where they're ready for that, to be able to even trust a therapist, a stranger?
Yeah, so, one of the things that I think is really important based on the question that I'm hearing is that trust that needs
Glad you got one out of that.
there needs to be that trust that's developed with the clinician first. If I'm going in to speak with a therapist about whatever it is, if I don't feel as though I can trust you, if I don't feel as though I can open up to you, then everything else is, what else is going to be able to happen? And so even though, yes, EMDR is a form of therapy where it can work very rapidly when compared to other forms of therapy, taking that time to build that rapport with your clinician first, with someone that you can trust, is a huge component of that. And that's why I spend probably more time, I would think, than other EMDR therapists in that phase. And phase 2 is more building that rapport with them.
Right.
I will say that, like, for me, it's hard to connect with people as a norm. And so for me, like, I really have to trust someone before I'll go that deep. And I've been very lucky that all the therapists that I've worked with have seen that in me and figured out ways to reach me, because I'm not easy. Like, I'm just not easy to connect with. And I feel like I
personally attest to this. It took years for her to hug me.
It's true.
Or anybody.
It's true. But
she's not a hugger. Well, she is me now, but she's not a hugger.
I think that's, if I can just add something really quickly, I think that's so important to acknowledge, because one of the things that went through my mind as I was beginning my journey in EMDR was, well, they don't actually have to go into detail about what their experience is. So why does that trust have to be established so much? And they're not just trusting you with the details, whether they choose to go in depth or not. They're trusting you with their person being in that space and their emotions that are coming out.
Right, because it's almost like a hypnotic state. Like, like I don't actually have my eyes open up part of it, and so, like, I'm actually trusting the person in the room to not, like, be somewhere else, like doing something else, like actually be there with me and like helping me in that moment. And there is a piece of, like, you have to, like, connect.
But even in the process of EMDR, it's broken up into 8 phases. And in the first couple of phases, it is all about building the rapport, setting the person up with the best preparation, the mental tools, so that this collaborative event can really be the most effective. And so the phases we're going to talk about what to expect, that generally, even though their experience is so specific to what he does in his practice and she's experienced as a patient for EMDR, generally follow in one way or shape or form these skeleton of order, if you will. So the first phase being the history taking, which in essence does build a lot of the trust. You're asking the questions about, tell me about yourself, tell me about why you're here, tell me about your life, and do you decide? Do people come to you because of the type of therapy you do, or do they come to you because of the type of afflictions you treat, and maybe they hear about you, and then when they come to you, they find out about it? Which is it mostly?
So mostly right now, it's because of the type of therapy that I do.
Okay.
I want to say that about 75 to 90% of my caseload has to do with severe trauma and people that have come to me specifically for EMDR, whether they found me through Google or word of mouth or what have you. That's mainly what I'm seeing.
Well, and the reason for that, I mean, like we talked about, this therapy has only been around since 1987.
Right.
Shapiro didn't come out with the book until 95, I believe. And so like there's, it's still kind of like getting off the ground. I mean, I know it sounds like it's been around a long time, but it actually hasn't in the world of therapy.
It takes a while.
Yeah. Because
people have to be I hate to say this, guinea pig,
right.
And kind of fine tune it and develop it into more of a process that you can expect a certain kind of result if you do things this way, and this is what to avoid.
Yeah, and what I could say about that, the beautiful thing is that there have been so many hundreds of research studies on EMDR to prove its effectiveness. So in the short time that it's been around, like you said, since 87, there have been so many different studies that prove its effectiveness, that prove that it is a modality that can work more rapidly than other modalities that people may go into. It's been proven effective and useful by the World Health Organization, the Department of Defense, and the American Psychological Association, and others. So, it is such a proven form of therapy that you have people that go directly to this and say, I'm experiencing PTSD, Cptsd, depression, anxiety, the other things that you mentioned as well, and they know that they can go into this therapy. It's been well researched. The people that are conducting the therapy have been well trained, hours and hours of training with supervisors and such, so they can go into this with confidence that this is going to be something that is researched and something that's proven to work.
Beautiful. Okay, and so when you first have somebody come to see you and you do the first part, which is the history taking, and you prepare them in the second phase with the mental tools, how long generally does that process take, you feel, or is it completely subjective to each particular person's presented situation?
Yes.
Okay. Next.
I will say that in my experience, I have had people come in and I've been able to get through a history taking in just one session, and dive into preparation, either that section or the next. I've had people where I cannot even begin to get through the history taken. I have to be a real careful judge of character. That's why I say I always go with a professional, because, for example, if I can give an example, I had a client, I want to say this last year sometime. This client came in and I asked, "What brings you in?" Immediately burst into tears, right? So you have to be extremely careful when you're doing that history taking, because you don't want to ask certain questions that may re-traumatize the client, especially when you haven't gone through preparation first. So for some clients, it depends on what I'm feeling, the energy that I'm feeling when they come into the room. I may just start with phase 2. I may start with some kind of preparation, some kind of self-stabilization techniques that they can do and that they can work on together before we get into
to get them to be more receptive, to calm, to feel like they could trust you. I could see that. I could see that if I went to a therapist and I'm freaking out because and I'll tell you this, if I had done that, I could think that this is how it would have gone down, because whenever I went to a therapist, I walked in suspicious. I was that person.
Yeah.
I was not any therapist's happy person. Like it wasn't good. It was really bad, actually. I would go in and I would ask them questions and keep asking them questions because I wanted to know, sell me you, like let me know why I should trust you, because I had such trust issues from the very thing that I needed help with.
Right.
And I needed to know, like when you were saying, you don't want a person, you're closing your eyes and you're doing this therapy, you don't want to think that the other person is like checking their phone.
Right.
Like you want to make sure that you got somebody that is really going to be present with you and all in with you because they're walking with you through this mental tunnel, right? And so I wanted to know that. And, maybe it was just like kind of like how you had your bad-ish experience. Maybe that's the reason I had my bad-ish experiences was with my attitude and my picker, like at the time.
Well, I mean, like I think about my very first therapist, like she was actually an intern. So she had a supervisor and all that stuff. And I remember saying to her as I sat down, and I was still using at the time, like I was a completely different person. But I said to her, I'll teach you a few things. And I always think that when I go into a therapy, especially now that I'm so educated, like,
I didn't think of that.
I'm like the worst patient ever. Because I'm like, well, what about this? And have you heard about this? And do you know this? And because I just know a lot of things. And so it's really hard for me to find that person that I can trust and believe in and feel like they really got my back.
Because it's really natural if you have PTSD to have trust issues.
Right.
Can I throw something out there?
Yeah.
I love both of those things, right? So I'm coming from the experience of having my own therapist, right? And I've gone through several therapists. And then the therapist that I have now is absolutely amazing. Has helped me through quite a number of things over the years. And so going in with that attitude of I'm going to ask you about you, tell me about you, sell me on you, I absolutely love that, because you are trusting this person with something that is so fragile, which is you are trusting them with you. And so if I have a client that comes in and wants to ask me 1,000 different questions, ask away,
right?
Because I want you to know.
Beautiful.
Well, and
I love that.
The cool thing about that is like they actually sometimes frown upon you giving too much information about yourself as in the field. And so like I've been blessed where I've had therapists that actually like knew that I needed that. That
I couldn't
I
do
needed
somebody
that connection.
who wouldn't share. I need to know. It's kind of like in recovery when you want to heal from an addiction and you want to know that the other person's walked through that. I need to know. It can't just be that you went to school, you didn't know what you wanted to be when you grew up,
so
and you just picked a thing, and you just chose it, and there's no reason, you've done no work on yourself to find out where you're codependent or driven and whatever like that.
I just can't think of a therapist that doesn't have a reason to be there.
Doesn't have a reason, but there are therapists that in spiritual corners they call it the unhealed healer, who believes that they're just there for everybody else.
Well, and so
right?
I've heard it as called the wounded healer.
Yeah, well, in therapeutic circles. Yeah. But in spiritual circles that I'm familiar with, they call it the unhealed healer because they don't think they themselves have a reason why they're doing it and a reason to keep benefiting from the doing it. Like, I'm sure you learn things as you go about yourself, don't you?
I learned so much about myself, and I welcome learning things from my clients, because I'm not the, I know everything, there's no way I know everything.
It's a
There's
journey.
so much left to learn, to experience, and so I learn more about myself as I'm working with other people.
That's perfect. Well, the opinions expressed here are strictly those of the people who gave them and do not represent any 12-step program or should replace your own intuition or professional medical advice. At this point, we're going to take a break, and we'll see you in a little bit. Welcome back. You can watch us on Facebook, YouTube, and on Amazon Fire TV, or you can listen to us on the PHLV Radio app, or get our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeart Radio. And if none of that means anything to you, just go to themeetingspace.com and click on The Real Recovery Show. You'll see a list of all of our episodes that you could watch at any time, and also links to all those things, the podcast, the Spotify, all of that, so that you can listen audibly instead if you want. It's really kind of crazy. We had just looked recently and saw that the amount of people just on Facebook alone following was like thousands and thousands, and we're like, how did that happen? It's crazy. But anyway, so before the break, we started talking about the 8 phases that EMDR is broken into. And so we started off by talking about the history taking, the getting the background, the getting comfortable, the starting the relationship in the first part with the history taking. And then the second one is preparing the person. And in that, a person can be taught different mental tools, or maybe emphasize the ones that maybe they already know that they could be using for this process, not just for what they go into for the EMDR session, but also in general to be comfortable to start off there. And I read this article written by an EMDR therapist, and she said that she also uses certain words that signify either stop or slow down, not so that the patient has total control over the speed of it, but so that the patient can understand that they have the power, if it does get too overwhelming, to stop. But a really good therapist will also be able to tune in and make sure that they don't get too overwhelmed with what's coming up. But I kind of thought that was kind of interesting when I saw the article, because, I have but I have some experience with BDSM. And in BDSM, there are, if you've ever heard or seen 50 Shades of Grey, there's the green, yellow, and red, or whatever words you want to do it. And in it, there are people communing together for an experience, and they can let the other person know without going all into it, it's time to slow down, I can't do this, or stop. So it's kind of interesting. So that's just how my mind works. But anyway, back to you guys. I have to keep it interesting for you guys, right? No, it's very interesting in and of itself. So when you go through the preparation, Chief, when you go through that process with people, what do you normally focus on? Are there certain tools you make sure that they have, or do you customize it to each person based on what you find already is something they know or benefits them?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I think my response to you is yes.
Yeah.
Honestly, yeah, because
I saw it coming.
So if I have a client that has, I'll give you an example of my clients that are experiencing Cptsd. So that's complex PTSD that may stem from trauma stemming from their childhood, or they could be in a situation for an extended period of time, right? They may not have any kind of tools that prepares them to go forward into being able to talk about or process through their trauma. So we may have to start from scratch. How are you? What is your breathing like even? When you are moving through life, are you able to stay regulated in an everyday situation that occurs, or do you become dysregulated whenever something happens, So we may even have to start there. And that's very, very basic, but for some people that may be where we need to start, and that's perfectly okay. So I have clients that have had a lifetime of nothing happening, and then something occurred. Well, with that client, their breathing may be okay. Their ability to move through life without becoming dysregulated, they're okay with that, except for when it comes to this thing, and then they become dysregulated. They need to learn how to have better control over different things that occur. So depending on where the client is, that's where we go. And then in phase 2, we focus on, or at least I would say I focus on also telling them what the rest is going to look like. So what are phases 3 through 8 going to look like? What are the different movements, eye movements, or whatever that we may include into this. What is that going to look like? And then I also tell my clients about their window of tolerance. And this actually speaks to what you were saying about being able to be in tune with the client. Mm-hmm. So as we go through, one of the things that I'm asking the client is, what do you notice or what have you, as we go through the phases. But that window of tolerance, I tell the client, this is where, if this is your window, and if you are being blown out of your window of tolerance, I need to know that. I'll probably be able to see it before you say anything, but I want to stay within your window of tolerance so that we can continue to process.
You should be able to tell, right? With the breathing starting to change, with the tension starting to happen, the
leg shaking,
the flushing, they start to get restless or something, or they're maybe less responsive, or something's going on. Yeah.
What I like that he said is he talks about the different types of eye movement, because I've done the light bar, I've done the tapping, I've done the two fingers, so just depending on the type of the specific therapist and what they feel works best with that client, like it's good to know what's going to happen,
Right.
And the reason that I need to go over that in phase 2, and I have a little bit of practice with the client, is a couple of different reasons. So you mentioned the different forms of things that we can do as far as the eye movements, or the dual attention stimulation is what is referred to. The client may not be able to do this for whatever reason. I have clients that can't do a butterfly. I myself can't do the two fingers going left and right because I actually get really dizzy doing that. And so that,
I could see myself getting dizzy too.
Absolutely. So we have to go over these things, and also in preparation, in practicing whatever kind of movements we're going to do to give us that dual attention stimulation, keeping us for a couple of seconds in our trauma, but also here safely in this room. That's how we learn how to install or allow the client to experience the positive things that we set up in the preparation phase.
Right.
So if
Okay, so we have tools, we have preparation, we know what we're going into, we have a decent idea, we can start feeling comfortable, we can imagine the process that we're about to walk into. Well, then now we go into phase 3, which is the assessment, which we focus now on what is it that we're really wanting to work on today. And it has 3 parts to it, actually more so 4. One is, what is the image, what is the thing you picture about the event that's associated with this fear or the depression or whatever that you're trying to heal. And then what is the negative belief? What is the narrative? What is the script that is running in the mind? And then also, what are the related emotions? Maybe not even something that you're really aware of that you're feeling, but maybe the body sensations that you have. And this is all really important because sometimes people don't actually remember as much the event and the image, but the thing that they might be able to ascertain quicker is the negative script. We talked about on a previous episode that, somebody had once said to me, how do you know what your intuition is? How do you know what your buried subconscious ideas are? That's all tucked away and nobody really has access to it. And I said, just get upset and then complain about it. And you will start to hear exactly what you're really thinking. And if you ask yourself, where did you get that idea, or what does it remind you of, you'll be able to remember, a specific event or something like that. Like with everybody having varying degrees of being able to do it based on how much they've experienced repression. But at the same time, these things that are in our subconscious, they're in the back of our mind, are not dormant. They're not inert. They're not doing anything. It's not like, well, why go? Why even bring this stuff up? What is the point? I don't really want to feel this. I don't really want to go through this. Well, you're living a limited life because this is the programming that's deciding how you see things and what you choose and whether or not you have the courage and the empowerment to do things in a bigger way. And all the times that you may feel like you wish your life was different, but you don't understand why you can't do that. It's the negative scripts. It's the the trauma response. It's the idea, like, I don't want to be like that person. I don't want to go back there. I don't want to experience that again. I just got the chills. So we make decisions about who we think we're supposed to be and what we think we're supposed to be experiencing in this life and how much we think we deserve and whether or not we think we can have something or can do something, all based on these ideas, these beliefs, these decisions that we've made in sometimes a fraction of a second, because of an event that was so overwhelming by the way the mind was interpreting it, that the mind has to say, okay, our solution is don't ever this, or let's not this, or never mind that, or I can't this, or I suck at that, or whatever. But whatever it is, there's a reason to want to go through this. And I'll say this last thing and I'll turn it over. Oftentimes I hear people say, well, I'm not that emotional, I don't really have any big deals, etc. But then their life feels very small and they have a lot of judgments and they have a lot of fears, but they don't really talk about it that much. And so they do actually have it. They do. We get to a place where whatever it is that we're running on, the narrative that we're interpreting our environment with, it gets to a place where it's intolerable and we're ready to break free of whatever it is. And so when we're ready, this is a really great way of, if you can have the image of whatever it is, the negative belief and the emotion, and possibly even, and this is the last part of it, a positive belief that maybe you concurrently at the same time believe, or something you wish you would believe. It could be the opposite of the negative belief, or it could be just a thought, like, I wish I was able to think blah, 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 because I feel like I'd be so much freer. But I currently believe this, and I wish I didn't. I wish I could really just take this and dissect it and be able to have a different experience.
Well, and for me, this step was so crucial because I didn't have to talk about all the details again, right. Like, it was just like, okay, what do you see? How does that make you feel? On a scale of 1 to 10, where is that feeling? Like, it wasn't like me rehashing all the gory details again. It was just me giving the therapist the ammunition to help me reprocess this.
Yeah, you don't have to go into detail. I think that's something that's so important about EMDR, and that's something that really makes EMDR stand out when I consider it in relation to the other therapies that I've done. I've had clients that their therapist has said, why don't you go to Chief to get EMDR and then come back? Now, in that statement, the thing that I will say is EMDR is a full treatment in and of itself. However, you can have that dual attention stimulation component, and that just in and of itself can be beneficial to clients that are experiencing things. I have a client that just recently experienced a huge trauma and has a current therapist. And that therapist said, why don't you go to Chief and experience that part of EMDR, which for him was phases 3 through 8, essentially. And it took about 2 sessions, and then the client was, what they were feeling right after the trauma, completely gone.
I can imagine that therapists would be like, you know what? Maybe I could just cut out the middleman and go and get certified to do this myself.
But some therapists don't want to. Right. I mean, like, when I started seeing a therapist for EMDR after I'd done it with my friend and started actually seeing a therapist for EMDR, I was seeing a therapist that I'd been seeing for 10 years. And she did CBT and DBT. She didn't do brain-based. She did cognitive. And so, like, there's some therapists that don't want to go there, and there's some therapists that just aren't, it's just not their thing, like, I don't know how to explain it.
Everybody needs to do what's right for them, the patient, the therapist, etc. Absolutely. But if you are a therapist and maybe you're watching this video because it's something you want to move into, I hope that this video can help you as well. Just get your head wrapped around maybe if this is right for you in your practice.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in this process of the assessment, what if they don't have a direct memory of like an image, if you will?
Yep.
They just have the negative script and the feeling, but they don't have a visual. Can you do it still?
Absolutely. So you can work with emotional clusters. And so
Which are?
So, for example, you have a situation where a person is getting angry around a certain thing or things that are occurring. You can work with that.
Oh.
You don't always have to have, it goes back to specifically this situation. You just have what comes up for you when a trigger occurs.
Oh,
and
interesting.
You can work with that.
So would that be that in a cluster, let's say this person has anger issues, right? And so they get angry about these people, these situations, and you kind of just say, okay, you could picture the scenario that you've seen yourself get angry and what you feel the other people are doing, and you can use that?
You can use that. You can go through each person individually and
Oh, that would have been so helpful.
work with that.
I will say that, like, for me, when we did some of this, like when I would pick a situation or whatever, by the time we were done, it was a completely different situation.
Yeah, that can occur when you get through working with, maybe if you go through it by each person, by the time you finish one or two, the whole thing you may not feel anything at all. And part of that is because there's a part of the brain that when you are encountering these really intense situations, that part of the brain that controls memories and things of that nature starts to shut down. And so you literally may not remember. The memories have not been encoded, and you have no access to anything that happened. But your body's going to continue to feel what happened. And so
And your negative script from it is going to continue to keep fueling that as long as it is. I had an incredible amount of toxic shame. And I had one of them was I was told that I was lazy and a leech. What good am I? And you would think, just leave it in the past. Somebody said it. Just use positive affirmations. But every single time, like if I was working for someone and they called me into their office, or somebody talked about, man, this is taking a while, I would immediately feel the toxic shame because my negative script was, they think I'm lazy. They think I'm lazy. I'm lazy. I'm not doing enough. And man, you could kill yourself in workaholism trying to outrun your own negative script. Yeah. And so that's really good. And so
for me that was, you're stupid. Like I was told I was stupid a lot when I was young. And so like it took me until I was like pretty healed to finish my degree, you know, and I'm definitely not stupid. But I just learned it differently, and growing up in the 80s it wasn't as easy to learn differently.
If I could throw out there, for me it was you're fat.
Oh, really?
And so that led to me being bulimic for a number of years. And, that all the related tooth decay and the money that I've spent on these teeth, girl. Jeez. But like,
we're going to have you on another episode. We're going to talk about that. All right. Well, awesome. And so in that assessment where you're trying to find the thing itself to heal, to go and address, that's when you pull up the positive belief that you're going to install, I guess is the word, later. And so is it something that, is a belief that they themselves bring to you, or do you do what I just said, like you just kind of look into it and kind of get a feel and maybe help them find what would work?
So it depends. It depends on the client. So I do have some clients that come in, and when we're in phase 3 and we're looking at these different targets, they may have something that they come in with. So if their negative cognition is I'm not good enough, they may have their positive cognition. They may know it right away. They may not know anything that they would rather feel instead of I'm not good enough. We try to work towards that. I have a list that I can provide to the clients if we are really struggling to come up with a negative or positive cognition. And then during the process, their positive cognition, if it goes, it can change from I am good enough to I did my best, so it can change as they're going through.
Perfect. Okay, and then the next phase is the desensitization. I said it.
I can't say it.
Application.
I can write about it, but I can't say it.
So you you have done it where you used the fingers, the two fingers. Yeah. And can you talk about how you ended up using a different approach? That there's a lot of different approaches, but that's what you've ended up.
Yeah, so when I started out at the trainings and everything, we're trained to use the two fingers to go through the bilateral stimulation or the dual attention stimulation. And so that's, I think, what EMDR might be most known for, because that is a component that's unique to EMDR, is that component there. But that probably looks weird. I'm just shaking my fingers there. But there are so many different ways that you can do it. You mentioned a light bar. I used to have tappers, but tappers and water do not mix, so I no longer have tappers. You can do tapping on your legs. You can do butterfly if you're comfortable. And the thing that I have ended up using now, part of COVID and not wanting to get too close to the clients to do the hand waving, I've started to go from kneecap to kneecap and have the client watch their hand as they're going from kneecap to kneecap. I was introduced to that by learning a protocol called RTAP, so it's recent events trauma protocol. And so if something were to happen, a huge trauma were to happen, this is the kind of protocol that I would use if I were called into the field. And it's just my experience. I have not done any research or anything like that, but it seems like that works a little bit faster than the other forms that I've used. Now, it could be a whole mix of things that plays into a part of that, but that seems to be my experience. So if the client is comfortable with that, we go over a host of different options. If the client is comfortable with that, then that's what we stick with. And no matter what you use, that dual attention stimulation is what we're trying to get at, so that the client is present here, safe in the room with their therapist, but we're also allowing them to go back and process chunks of the trauma a little bit at a time. I may, depending on where they are, so that's why you have to be in tune with your client, you may process 10 seconds, 15, 30, it just depends, but that dual attention stimulation allows them to be here and process chunks.
And so is it a back and forth motion no matter what, whether you do kneecaps or you do two fingers or doing this or kneecaps? Is that always the goal, is to just have their eyes moving back and forth while they're going and looking at what it is that they need to desensitize?
So I've trained primarily with eyes, but it doesn't have to be the eyes. You can use something with sounds as well. I also have that option. I found this online system that allows you to do the eyes, and this is when we were all on lockdown. What do I do? And this is before I discovered the RTEP protocol, but you can do sounds as well.
But even when you have sounds going from left to right, right, your eyes are moving because your attention is going to whichever side you hear the sound. Like your eyes are automatically, wouldn't you find that they would still do that, even though that's not the overt goal?
Usually my clients' eyes are closed, so
you wouldn't know.
I wouldn't know, I would imagine, because I would think that, but I don't know to be sure.
Right.
The point is to get that dual attention stimulation. The point is to activate both sides of the brain so that we can get them to process those chunks. That bilateral stimulation, we can get them to be here and they're there at the same time, just for short amounts of time. That's the key. Regardless of how you do it, with eyes, sounds, tappers, light bar, what have you.
Yeah.
Gotta get you to be able to do that.
There was one time that I did it where I was like actually holding something.
May have been the I'm saying tappers, buzzers.
There's it like buzzes in your hands back and forth.
But you buzz or they buzz?
No, it just does it. Like the machine just
like
does
a
it. Like a
vibration?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
And then there was another therapist that I was working with that she tapped my hands as she did it, when going back and forth. And what was interesting about that is, I mean, I'm not necessarily someone that likes to be touched by people. So
that's a lot of trust.
And that was the thing, is like, I knew I must trust this woman implicitly because I'm letting her touch me.
Letting you get that close to you as well. That's really close. And like I said, with COVID, I kind of stop getting that close to people, but that's a lot of trust, and that trust that's developed during phases 1, 2, and 3, so that we can get into 4 and have that kind of work. That's a lot.
Well, and it was also we had been working together for a few months by that point, so you would
already have that.
It was the way that she like
progressed
navigated me through other things, you know, that kind
That's
of
beautiful.
helped it.
Yeah. And I've seen Tay go through this process too. I knew her before she did it. And I can attest to also the degree of trust that she ended up having, or even her, when she would talk about the therapist, of how it would be more and more in a very comfortable vibration, and she just really felt like this is somebody that she trusts. And I think that that's beautiful. I guess if I could tell you a quick story. So Tay came to work for me, and when the recovery store first started on Fort Apache, and Tay told me in no uncertain terms that I am not to hug her in any way, shape, or form. And I also made her cry when she dropped a whole bunch of books on the floor, but that's a whole other thing.
But then she tries to hug me, and I'm like, why would you make me uncomfortable? Why do you want to hurt me?
Why do you want to hurt me? She would say. You know, she had all of the retort. So one day, I had to leave, and I was in a hurry, and I'm thinking, okay, what do I need to do to get out of here, blah, blah, blah. And she was helping a customer. And so I said, all right, goodbye. And I went towards her. And if you could imagine that everything started slowing down. And I went to her, and she goes, what are you doing? And I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Oh, no.
And I was like, okay, I'm out of here. And I left, and I go, oh my God. Like, I have to remember.
Now you can hug me whenever you want.
Now she asks me for hugs all the time.
Yes.
Just let you know. Anyway. So now we've done the desensitization, and I'm sure nothing is, you know, one thing and then you do the next. Everything's so interwoven in this process, because the next two phases, the fifth phase being the installation of the positive message, and the sixth stage being the body scan. You know, how are you doing? What are the results? How do you feel now about this? Have we accomplished what we needed to accomplish? With you, when you do that process, what does that look like for you with the positive and the,
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say we've gone through our target sequencing, we've done our phase 3, and we're moving into phase 4. And so I'm starting by asking them when they bring up that incident, image, feeling, when they bring it up to the forefront of their mind, what are they feeling? How strong are they feeling? Getting their subjective units of distress, their SUD, from a scale of 0 to 10. Mm-hmm. How strongly are you feeling it? Where are you feeling it in your body? And what's the negative cognition associated with that? Just to bring that up again. So let's go with I'm not good enough. What would you rather feel? I'm good enough. And then we just start from there. And so we start the bilateral, the BLS, bilateral stimulation. We start that process. And then about every 3 sets or so, so a set is just when we're going, and then I pause, I ask them, what are they experiencing? And that helps me be in tune with what they're experiencing, help them be in tune with what they're experiencing. What did they notice? Whatever they noticed, maybe they noticed a decrease, increase in what the sensations are. And then I ask them to go with that. Whatever you're experiencing, go with that, and they resume a set. After about 3 sets or so, I ask them where their SUD is. And that's just a gauge. Is it going down? Is it going up? Is it staying the same? And so as their SUD is going down, once it gets down to a 0 or 2, I ask them, has that positive cognition stayed the same? Is it still, I'm good enough, or did it change to I did the best I can, or what have you? Once we get down to a 0 or 1, we start working on getting that SUD, that VOC, validity of cognition, up to a 7.
That's amazing. That must be such a beautiful process to work with somebody and to see the light go on, to see their shoulders relax, to see that they could tell you that they feel a certain way, but you could see it in a person.
Yeah, I can see them going through that process. So
That's beautiful.
I have a particular client in my mind that's really tense, and then you start getting down to those from a 10 to a 7 to an 8, everything's relaxing. We are just like melting into the chair. There's the burden that's been released, and they literally feel lighter because they don't have that pent up negative energy stored in their body. Their body is processing it and releasing it however it needs to, and they are ready to move over into the installation phase. You can
God,
see
that
it.
is so beautiful, because you think of a lot of times people who are chronic relapsers who have usually some form of PTSD, and to be in and out and in and out and in and out of addiction, and to think that there's no way, like, if I have this experience, I'm probably going to use. If I have that experience, if this gets triggered, if this person dies, I don't know that I can handle it, or whatever. If I lose this job, I don't know if I can handle it. And a person ends up having reservations about their sobriety and their clean time, because they, in the back of their mind, think, I don't know that I don't know, my trauma might take me out, And so to have something like that, which is one of the things that we look for in a drug or a bottle, is to be able to shift our feelings, right?
Yeah.
But in this way, it is way more long lasting, and it's not going to get you a DUI. I don't think, right? I don't know. The way you were talking about your client, I was like, wow, that feels like a nice little high. Like, all the relaxed.
Help you avoid getting DUI.
Yeah, your advertisement could be, get from a level 12 to a 1 or a 2. And so then you see the body scanning, and then a person, you get to a place where now they have this new positive idea, and so now the closure phase of it.
If I could, I want to make sure that I emphasize phase 5. So phase 5 is that installation phase. So that is what's allowing you to envision that positive cognition in your life as you're moving forward. And so EMDR is a 3-pronged form of therapies, right? So we're looking at our past traumas that have led to the symptoms that we have now, when we're desensitizing those symptoms, and now we can go into the future with that positive cognition.
So you have them replace the imagery as well, in a sense.
Yeah. Yep. So I'm working to replace primarily the cognition, but then I also want to work with them in a future template, if we can, and we can imagine them going into the future. And if there is this kind of situation that comes up, can you imagine using that positive cognition in it? And then we tap that in, or we use the dual attention stimulation to increase that from a 1 to a 7.
So you use the eye movement therapy not just to desensitize the negative thought, but to more install the positive.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Absolutely.
All right, I'm late to the show.
And that that's because of how the memory works. So if I say to you, the sky is
green. I need help.
The sky is blue, because people will automatically go to that word, typically, because that's where that's where we have learned that memory association is automatically connected with the sky being blue. And so if we change that to in their mind goes automatically to that negative thing. If we can change that to it going to that positive, that's what they're going to go away with as we're doing that installation phase. So that's why it's so important that we have to add that.
That's beautiful. And so when you were doing it, when your therapist was working with you, Tay, and you went through all of that, did you end up having visualization of positive to look into, okay, what could my new picture be like? Or did it just something that you had the positive idea and that's it ended up?
My positive ideas always change through the process. Like, I think that this is what I want the positive idea to be, and this is what it ends up being. And being such a visual person, because I am an artist first, and so like being such a visual person, the imagery just does change for me, but I also feel like a lot of because of my somatic experiences, I didn't get to clear as many things with EMDR as I have since with brain spotting, but EMDR was the thing that helped me open them up and like
to be able to even get to it.
Yeah, for sure. So for me, most of the things didn't really resolve until I started brain spotting. But without EMDR, I would have never even been able to start it.
I think that's also really an important little adjunct to add in here, is that oftentimes we could be too loyal to a label or too loyal to a particular method. Like people will go to 12-step meetings and they'll think that, okay, now that I've totally signed up mentally for this program, this should be all I ever need. And even like if they end up going with one therapist, or using one particular modality, they think, now this has really helped me, so this is really all I need. To be in the mindset of recovery, to constantly be evolving and healing, one must adapt an open mind, because maybe, like you were saying, what worked for me as a patient or as a woman sobering and getting healthier and healthier may not be the thing tomorrow. Maybe I'll need another tool. And even with you, in being the therapist, open to what else can work, what else can help me get to.
I will say that for me, like if I think back to those first CBT sessions, and then I think to getting into recovery, and then I think to DBT and CBT and different therapists, because I had 3 different CBT therapists for different reasons, and then getting into, like, when I first started therapy, I thought I was going to be an LCSW because that's the therapist that I had.
Right.
She was an LCSW. I thought I was going to be in the CBT because that's the therapist that I had. And as I got, more educated, because, like, I actually know a lot about these things because of the work I do. Mm-hmm. And so for me, like, seeing it in a bigger, broader picture, I've been able to be like, okay, well, this is what I learned from work. This is what I learned from school. What works for me? What
and you get a
me?
Very strong appreciation for that, the open mind, the willingness to heal, the willingness to be helpful. It's all you really need is your main tool, because more gets provided as you go.
I would throw something in there. I'm so glad that you mentioned brain spotting, because the thing that I've learned over time, not being so you have to be flexible, right? You have to know or be willing to be open to what's going to work for you and what's going to work for you at different parts of your journey.
Right, that's a big thing too.
Different things will work at different times.
Right.
And then also EMDR itself is, it includes different aspects of different therapies. So when we're talking about our body experiences, that's somatic experiencing right there. When we're talking about those cognitions, those are the thinking, cognitive therapies that are right there. When we're talking about where are you feeling it in your body and being mindful of things of that nature. So it's adding different
and then the history taking, more sometimes it uses a lot of talk therapy just in the history taking and the introduction of certain tools. Just it could be all of the different things, like a little of whatever caters to this one person to make them feel safer and to be able to trust the process more.
Every modality is kind of like that, though, because even CBT started as cognitive therapy, then it was cognitive behavioral. Every therapy that you look at has components from other therapies, and that's
and anybody, you don't just come with one tool, you know, because you can't have a hammer and think everything's going to be a nail, right? So the last phases of this, so we've talked about the history taking, the preparation, the assessment, the desensitization, installation of the positive belief, and then the body scanning, and then 7 and 8 are the closure and the reevaluation. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So depending on where I am or where we are with the client. So say, for instance, if we haven't made it all the way through desensitization, if we are having to finish the session and we are at a 4 or something of that nature, then I'm going to do a reevaluation of where we are, how far we've come with that client, and then we're going to do closure. Closure is the last thing that I'm going to do because I don't want to allow the client to leave my office open. We want to shut them up. I want to get them back into their whatever they're working on, whatever we're working on, get it back into their container if that's what we built.
That's a big thing that I used was the container. And I remember telling you about it, and I'd be like, I have to put this in my container. Hold on a minute.
Absolutely. I work on a container and calm, safe place if the client can find one or if the client has one.
I've given her lots of stuff to put in her container.
They just all fit in there.
and so that's where we'll end the sessions. Now, let's say we've gotten all the way through our desensitization. So in phase 4, we've gotten all the way through phase 5, doing phase 6, the body scan throughout, and we've hit the target. We've finished the target. So then we're going to do a reevaluation. Are there other targets that we need to work on? Are there not? When you bring this back up to your mind, are the emotions completely desensitized and the positive cognition coming up? If that's the case, then hey, we're done. Let's do closure. Again, let's get you back into your container if there's anything else that we need to put in there.
And do you give them homework?
So EMDR is not a homework-based modality. That said, every clinician does things a little bit differently. I give homework, but it's not like I'm saying go into the field and do something. I'm saying as you're going throughout your day, I want you to just note what you're experiencing. Note what emotions, what feelings are coming up throughout the week. I don't want your mind to be so focused on your trauma throughout the week, because I want you to be able to start to go out and learn to experience and live your life. But I do want you to just pay attention as you're going.
And I could just imagine how people, if they don't have that kind of direction, could be like, did I have a feeling? Wait, is it associated with that thing? Wait, and like staring at their navel and pulling lint out of their belly button, and getting no work done, can't have a conversation. No, I'm looking to see if this is working for me. I don't know what's happening.
So one of the
I was gonna say, I know when I started CBT, like I would have to put stuff in like this. It was like 3 sections, and it was like the feeling, the distortion, and the truth, and like for me, that ended up turning into like affirmation cards where I could have like, oh, this is my cognitive distortion, and this is the truth, and like now like those kinds of things just naturally come in my head, and so having that kind of thing where you're like, okay, well, what is this feeling? Like being able to write it down and like look at it and like figure it out, like that's a big piece of healing.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. One of the homework pieces that I do but don't officially give would be writing things down, whether it's journaling, whether it's just keeping track of something. I want to go back to your point of what you said, and just like, is that associated? One of the meditations that I do with my clients, I have them see, just going through the meditation, leaves on a lake. And so as it's going down, or stream rather, leaves on a stream,
Leaves on a lake.
As it's going, leaves on a lake. I guess that does sound better, doesn't it? But as the leaves are going down, just notice them. You don't have to look at them. You don't have to examine them. You don't have to all that. Just notice them. You notice that thing that comes, notice it, and it takes practice, but that's what we're working on over time.
Perfect. On a future episode, we are going to have an entire episode on brain spotting. So it was mentioned here, and it is something also very helpful and even way newer than EMDR, but very powerful. And so that's coming up on a future episode. And so real brief, we have to wrap up right now, but how does a person become an EMDR approved therapist?
Yep, so my journey started at emdria.com, so EMDR International Association, emdria.org, I believe. And so as they're looking through trainings. I did part 1 and part 2 of basic training. And then if you decide to go further, you can start working towards certification. And then if you decide to go further, you can become an approved consultant and trainer, and you can start working with people to become an EMDR certified therapist and be trained and work with protocols and things of that nature. So
beautiful.
My
and
journey.
You can also be supervisor.
You can also be a supervisor like I am. So it's an incredible journey.
And your practice again is called
Chief Counseling.
Chief Counseling. So you can look them up here in Las Vegas.
I just want to say one thing to that. So there is a difference between someone that's trained and someone that's certified. And so if you are someone that's looking for a therapist and you want someone that's certified, make sure that they use that word.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been such an informative and helpful and just very, very fascinating topic.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you for joining us today on the Real Recovery Show. We'd like to give a special thanks to our sponsor and gracious host, PHLV Radio, here in Las Vegas. See you next week.